Okay, hey everybody. Welcome to this episode of Lunch with Alumni. We are super excited to have Sally Salari and Misha Nasro here, both from the class of 2009. And we're going to talk a little bit about them and what they're doing now, but we're also going to get into a very important topic that is close to them and that they are very knowledgeable about, and that is what is going on in Iran. So thank you so much to the both of you for coming and being on with us today to give us a little education and help us learn something. We really appreciate it.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah. Okay. So let's just jump in. If you each could just briefly introduce yourselves, share a bit about what you do now, your profession, what class year you were at DCDS, where you went to college, stuff like that. That would be great.
Mish, go first.
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Misha. Sally and I were class of 2009. Go Jackets. Do we say Go Jackets?
We say Go Jackets.
Okay, amazing. I ended up doing my undergrad at Stanford. I went to business school at Wharton. And throughout all of it, I've worked in health tech. And so currently working, leading partnerships for a healthcare tech company called Ribbon, which helps people find care using really accurate information. So totally different from today's topic, but this is really near and dear to me. So excited to get into it.
Yeah. And I'm Sally Salari. I'm also from the class of 2009, so long ago. And I went to Columbia for undergrad. I went to University of Michigan for med school, and I'm now in my last months of residency at Case Western in OBGYN. And in July of 2023, I'll be starting my reproductive endocrinology and infertility fellowship at University of Iowa.
So cool. You guys are so accomplished. Thank you so much. Okay. So tell us a little bit about your family backgrounds and your proximity to what is going on in Iran.
Yeah, well, for me, I was born in the United States, so I'm first generation Iranian American, but both my parents were born in Iran, and they individually immigrated to the States in 77 and 78, respectively, for college education. Initially with the intention of going back home after college, but after having met here, establishing themselves here, starting a family, but also perhaps more influential, the Iranian Revolution in 1979. It resulted in them building a life here, which I'm so thankful for. But that being said, growing up, our Iranian culture was very much interlaced with our American culture. And I was raised in a household where I regularly spoke Farsi, ate Persian food, and was very exposed to the culture, the movies, the art, the music, everything.
Yeah. And I can very similar story for my family as well. My parents immigrated to the US also in 77 and 78, respectfully. Also similarly, my mom was actually an exchange student in high school. She was in Ohio. My dad did his exchange student. He was first in London, then came here for university. So they both just, it was trendy, and I don't know what the word to use. It was like very to study abroad and come back, similarly to the way we study abroad, and that's what they were doing. And then when the revolution broke out, which we'll speak about in a moment, around like what that revolution actually meant, when the revolution broke out, it was a moment for, I think, my parents, perhaps Sally's parents, and most of many other college, high school educated students to just stay put and not go back to Iran because of all the turmoil of what was happening. And so there is about 1 million, if not more, Iranian Americans that for the most part, like immigrated here around that time to begin with, and then like subsequent years afterwards. Did I say it might be more than 1 million? That's something we should fact check. But similarly to Sally, like really maintained a lot of like what it meant to be Iranian in the home around language, food, culture. We in fact did a dance for the variety show, which
wow.
I don't know if it's going to get included in this, but yeah, that's a little bit of our kind of our story as well.
That's so cool. And Misha, aren't you also, I don't know if you still do it, but do you still have your Instagram account of
I do.
Yeah.
I do.
Oh,
so I
cool.
love to cook Persian, and that's another way that I keep it Yeah.
I love that. That's really special. Okay. So you guys both touched on this, and I think it's really important to get into this because a lot of us right now are just kind of warping into the current situation and what we're seeing on the news and hearing and seeing on social media. So if you guys could give us a little background as to how these protests started in Iran, leading up to like the most recent situation that kind of spurred this.
Yeah, so Misha and I both mentioned the Iranian Revolution, which happened in 1979. And essentially that was the toppling of the monarchy of the Pahlavi dynasty, because leading up to that point, they were kings and queens in Iran. And in an effort to want to move more towards a democracy for the people, but B, and maybe perhaps even more influential, was wanting to have more access and perhaps a say into the oil in Iran. Britain and America helped topple the monarchy, but as unfortunately sometimes goes in revolutions, the people of Iran didn't exactly quite get what they wanted. And instead, an Ayatollah, a supreme leader, was put in place, and Iran became the Islamic Republic. And to this date, the formal name of the country is the Islamic Republic of Iran. It is one of the only theocracies, if not the only theocracy in the world still, meaning it's ruled by religion. And it, as part of their ruling, as part of their laws, a lot of that has to do with enforcing very extreme interpretations of the Muslim religion, whether the people of Iran even identify as Muslim or not.
And I think a couple things to add to that. So I think there are a couple important facts to share up front. Iran, prior to the revolution, most of the Iranians are like practicing Muslims. And so there was a separation of church and state before, and it was a big component of like day-to-day life. So you could practice really with a lot of like ease. And I think the second thing to note is that when one of the reasons why the monarchy was overthrown was because there was a lot of unequal access towards wealth, like social rights. There was a lot of like, people were felt very abandoned by the Shah, and the Shah was the name of the king. The Shah was viewed as very Western leaning and very like ignorant of like people on the ground. So it created like an environment for the religious power to come and build support with the masses, a lot of times with the lower income, more pious individuals who were being promised a different way of life. So this is like the important backdrop of what happened. Is like 79 happens. There is like a desire for improved way of life in Iran. The result ends up being this regime. And within 1980 or so, they started to crack down on women's rights. So all of a sudden overnight, you saw the mandatory compulsory hijab, you saw a change in like rights around like marriage and divorce, inheritance. Like women just like had pretty equal status before, and then it got slighted in the years following the revolution. And so if we kind of like fast forward and now say 43 years, women have been treated as second-class citizens and many of the rights that they have. And there is, and the spark for what we're seeing today, the last 4 weeks of protests all came from something that tied to this notion of having a compulsory hijab.
Okay.
The compulsory hijab, like the law that was stated, was that any woman over the age of, I believe it's 9, has to cover their hair and cover their body in public. And that's regardless of religion, regardless of visitor status, like you just have to be covered. And there is a morality police that enforces this rule. And a lot of the way the morality police acts is very much at random. You don't really know who they're going to pick and who they will come and just like, and come and say like, your job is like here, not here, or here, not here, because there was a lot of like over the last 43 years, like women have gotten really creative with how they wear it. And then what happened is on September 22nd, no, September 13th. Do you remember, Sally? This was a fact checking moment. Mid-September, there was a woman by the name of Mahsa Amini. She was 22 years old. She's Kurdish Iranian. So Iran has different ethnic groups within it, but she's Kurdish. She was visiting Tehran and she gets stopped by the morality police. So think of it like random person. Think of it in the States, like if police randomly pull over a car, pull over a driver. So she randomly gets pulled. And over the course of 2 days, she gets like beaten for her hijab not being worn properly and dies under custody.
Initially say is that they're taking her to an educational center just so they can teach her on the proper wearings of a hijab, because like Misha said, women are trying to express themselves the way that they can. So maybe it's makeup, maybe it's with hair color, with earrings, with the color of your headscarf. But if it's past your forehead and technically showing a little hair, it's not allowed. And so random, they picked her, they claim that they're taking her to a facility for mandatory whatever videos, modules, if you will, to learn the proper wearings of the hijab. And then a day later, pictures surface of her intubated in a coma in the hospital.
Right. Okay.
And I think what really triggered this is that the women of Iran saw what happened with Gina is her Kurdish name, so I want to kind of be respectful of her heritage, and just thought that could have been me. It could have, because it was so at random, it could have been me. And basically in the weeks that follow, women start to take to the streets and protest against this mandatory hijab law that has turned into like, you could lose your life at the results of this law. And it was the tip of the iceberg, because you have an extremely, so a little like side note, women are extremely educated and very, despite the, all the things against them, like I think over 60% of universities are women, 97% literacy rate, like very educated subpopulation that honestly is just fed up. They're here like, we're fed up, and they start taking to the streets and they start first protesting Massa's death, and then protesting the hijab. And then as the regime started to crack down on protesters, they started to kill 16-year-old girls, 17-year-old girls pretty brutally. And that just like added more fuel to the flame. So that's what started, and what has since kind of taken place in the coming weeks is that the Massa's death started to represent all of the inequalities and all of the human rights violations that this regime has taken in the name of religion, which truly is like against everything that the religion stands for. And they're just demanding for first like an equal return of women's rights. But what's now we're watching develop day by day, like perhaps even more.
Wow. Okay. So this is all super helpful. With these protests and the uprisings, are there like organizers or groups that are kind of helping to get people involved and active, or is it really just women on their own time and families and people who want to be involved sort of taking to the streets? Like, what is the structure of it?
I think that's actually what is most powerful about this current protest, and what is and seems to be turning into a revolution by all accounts of the name, is that it's grassroots. It is the people of Iran. It is also not just women, it's men, it's children, it's of all ages, of all classes, of all belief systems, of all religions. And like Misha said, this is catapulted from one girl who was brutally killed because of something that was imposed on her that was a huge violation of her bodily autonomy and her human rights, and has catapulted into, we are fed up with everything that we have had to endure for the past 43 years. I think that this is probably one of the things that is making it most challenging for the regime to try to quiet and hush up, because they are turning off the internet. They are trying to silence people with being even more brutal and being more aggressive against anyone and everyone who's continuing to speak up. But they don't have one figurehead, one leader of the protest to kind of take down and then to kind of make people feel discouraged. And it's incredible because protests have popped up all over the country of Iran, among all the ethnic minorities within Iran. They've popped up globally across the country, including the United States. And the biggest thing that everyone's asking for in terms of supporting them is just to keep posting about it and keep publicizing it, thereby taking away the power of the regime in terms of trying to silence it and basically pushing against their propaganda that they're trying to promote by saying, oh, Massa Amini died because she had a heart attack.
Right.
Obviously, nobody believed.
Right.
So that is what's making everyone feel really encouraged, because the hope is that this time feels different. And hopefully this time the protests won't end and they won't stop.
There's two interesting things that I'll add here that as Sally said, it's leaderless. We're watching the first women-led, social media driven revolution in the world, period. And that is, gives me chills to say that.
Yeah.
Like, especially given the backdrop of to Sally's point about bodily autonomy, what have we been facing in this country? And there's a lot of parallels, my body, my choice. So that's the first one. And I think there are two things. So there are two things I want to add to that. One is that because it is leaderless, people there's been a question in the diaspora of is this just protests or is this something more? Is this the start of a revolution? And there is an author, Reza Aslan. He is author and scholar on Iranian history. And what he did is he went and he looked at the revolution of 1906, 1953, 1979. So there's been three different moments, and we talked about 79, but there have been three different moments in Iranian history. And he said, what were the things that actually caused movement across all three? And it was young people taking to the streets. It was the merchant class being involved, including oil workers. And then it was some element of the religious population. And right now, not only we've talked a lot about students, women, young people, taking to the streets. And for the last few weeks, oil workers, sugar workers, and steel workers have also joined strikes.
Wow.
And the second that the economic sector gets involved, that's where you're starting to see factions of the people coming together to come against the regime. So that's something that once we saw oil workers go on strike, and we can talk a little bit about JCPOA and the oil deal, and there is that whole backdrop behind this too. But once you start to see the oil workers go on strike, that's when I think a lot of the diaspora realize that, oh, this isn't maybe just those on the streets. The reason why then the second point I wanted to bring up is that, to Sally's point, that posting matters, and posting matters for two reasons. One is in 2009, Iran had what they called the Green Revolution, the Green Movement. It was the first thing that actually sparked Arab Spring.
Okay.
There was a rigged election, and people took to the streets to protest the rigged election. And there was a ton of media and press on the Western world as well that helped people feel motivated to make it to the street, to come to the streets. Unfortunately, Michael Jackson died in the middle of that revolution, and the press cycles changed. Yeah. And all of a sudden, Iran didn't get coverage, and in the darkness, the regime went and started to kill and go after families that were protesting on the streets.
Okay.
And so when there is Western media on when those eyes are on Iran, it causes the regime to be a lot more thoughtful and a lot more scared about what moves they make. This is why they're repressing the internet so that videos can't go out. This is why they are trying to silence the movement in their own ways, because they know they know that the more that gets out about what's happening, the more pressure there will be on them from the outside world. And so the revolution dies in darkness, but it stays alive with all of our support and visibility. So it's the first time we're there actually isn't a lot to donate to. It's just keep amplify the voices on the ground as much as we can.
I love that. That's so interesting too, because I've actually been thinking about this because the US midterm elections are coming up, and I feel like I have not been seeing as much coverage on the news anymore. So hearing that, all these other groups are joining the protest, that sounds like a lot of really good progress that's being made. Is that kind of what people are saying and how people are feeling on the ground?
I mean, to our knowledge, yeah, it's hard to know, right? Because we're not there. And as Iranian Americans, very proud ones at that, there is, I don't know if guilt is even the right word, but we are as close as it gets as people in the States who are watching this happen. We both have family still in Iran, but we're also not there. So I don't know what it's like to be my 30-something-year-old cousin who is scared to go to work, who wants to protest, but she's promising her dad that she won't because he's afraid she won't come home from work. Or my little second cousins, third cousins, whatever, even the younger generation, the Gen Z. I mean, we're seeing these videos of school children protest in recess and throwing their headscarves at their headmasters and headmistresses. I mean, the degree of bravery that is required to even remove your headscarf, let alone vocally and outwardly protest against the regime, is I cannot understate it enough. And so I think that's why we're so proud. That's why we're so terrified equally about what's going to happen, and hoping that the momentum is not lost. And it seems like it's not. But honestly, time will tell. And the more we can share, the more people who are not Iranian can empower themselves with knowledge to get a sense of what's happening in other parts of the world. Hopefully that will help make sure that the momentum is not lost.
Absolutely. And you both touched on this a little bit just now, but, other than posting on social media, which you both do an amazing job of, by the way, so hopefully we can get your handles and people can follow you to learn more. But how can we in the US support the women and the citizens of Iran who do want to make this change? What are some ideas that you have for us? Maybe what are some good news organizations or other organizations, nonprofits that are helping to kind of fund any of these efforts? Any resources or social media that we can be aware of that would be helpful for us to learn more?
Yeah, there's a lot out there. Misha, I'm sure you have a list too, but the ones that come to mind, you can follow pretty prominent Iranian journalist, Christian Amanpour, who's actually here stateside and works with CNN, Masih Alinejad. There are lots of actors and actresses who are very vocal, like Nazanin Boniadi, who is also on the board of the Center for Human Rights in Iran, CHRI. There is Golshifta Farahani, another Iranian actress, maybe more well-known to the United States, is an actor, Aryan Moyaed. He's in Succession. I love that show. And he's being very vocal. There are comedians like Maz Jobrani and Peyam Banifaz, a lot of really popular chefs. And then there are feminist groups. There's an Instagram account called From Iran. And then other organizations that come to mind are the National Iranian American Council and the Public Affairs Alliance of Iranian Americans. So I think honestly, following those accounts, reposting, and just reading. There have been some excellent coverage. NPR, Jon Stewart had podcasts recently about what's going on in Iran. New York Magazine, New York Times have recently started to post more about it. So just reading whatever materials out there.
So helpful. Thank you. Misha, anything to add there?
Yes, a few. So I think posting and following for sure. The other one that I would say is that there are now a series of petitions that are out that people can sign. So I'll have these listed down. So there's a few. One is, this is not a petition, actually. This is a contact your senator moment. One is contacting your senator to urge them to push for a UN investigative mechanism on crimes against humanity committed by the Islamic Republic. So that's push your senator to push for an investigation. The second is there is a petition going around to remove Iran from the UN Commission on the Status of Women. So they actually sit on the Women's Rights Council. So to remove this regime from that. And then there is another petition going around for investigation into possible financial/immigration violations by family members of the regime. So there are a lot of the current regime's children live in the US and London and Paris and whatnot. So there is another kind of call to investigate their immigration status and whether that should be allowed given the backdrop. So those are a couple things. I think we can definitely share the link to some of those petitions as well to get more support.
Awesome. Well, thank you both so much. This was incredibly helpful. We learned a lot. And if people have more questions or they want to follow you on social media, would that be okay? What are your handles? And if you want to get in touch with Sally or Misha, you can come through me, but what are your Instagram handles? If you don't mind sharing, you don't have to if you don't want to.
Yeah, that's fine. I can make mine public. Mine is, I think, just Sally Salari, like no spaces.
Okay.
I'm gonna double check.
Yeah. Mine's Misha Nasro. And I'll do a plug for something that's going to launch. We're going to launch Cook for Iran in a couple weeks. And there's a group of chefs that are doing a bunch of recipes to raise awareness.
Wow.
So Cook for Iran will be another one.
That's awesome. Okay, well, thank you both. This was great. And we really appreciate your time and all the info you shared with us. Thank you again.
Yeah, thank you
Thanks,
for
Annie,
highlighting this
having
really
us on.
important topic.
Of course.